The Complete Idiot's Guide to Alchemy by Dennis William Hauck. Part 1. Introduction to Alchemy. The roots of alchemy are buried in the shifting sands of ancient Egypt, as the craft developed from writing attributed to divine beings who are said to have come to Egypt over 10,000 years ago. The scribe Thoth, considered the first alchemist and also the father of music, mathematics, astronomy, and agriculture, recorded the wisdom of the ancient visitors and sealed his writings in two great pillars that became known as the Pillars of Hermes. According to legend, the pillars were rediscovered thousands of years after the Great Flood and hidden away in an isolated temple in western Egypt. The city of Alexandria was founded to study and translate the sacred texts, and from there the ancient spiritual technology of alchemy spread throughout the world. Chapter 1. Your Apprenticeship in Alchemy. In this chapter, Alchemy, the Art of Transformation, why alchemy is still relevant today, understanding the 6 types of alchemy, the fundamental philosophy behind alchemy, and learning alchemy. Just what is alchemy? This question can present a bewildering variety of answers, because alchemy is at the root of so many different traditions and disciplines. And that's unfortunate for the one simple thing about alchemy and its definition. So to avoid confusion in your study of this subject, remember this basic definition right from the start. Alchemy is the art of transformation. Alchemy is about how to change one thing into another. And the goal of alchemy is to perfect or evolve the substance at hand. Alchemists try to change something that is inferior, imperfect, or unacceptable into something that is better, more perfect, and closer to what they desire. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about metals, chemicals, or herbs, or about our bodies, minds, or souls. Nor does it matter whether we're talking about chemistry, biology, religion, sociology, politics, software, or psychology. The word alchemy is always about how to accomplish some sort of creative transformation. So there you have it. You've already made a giant leap toward understanding alchemy, and you've only just begun to read. And you'll be making many more giant leaps soon, I promise you. Alchemy may seem confusing and arcane, and at times even deliberately misleading. But once you understand their secret, coded language, the alchemist's words will all fall into place for you. And this book will teach you that ancient code of symbolic images, special terms, and secret ciphers in as straightforward a manner as possible. Why study alchemy? But why should you spend your time trying to penetrate the alchemist's coded language and learn the age-old secrets of alchemy? What relevance does alchemy have today? Surprisingly, this ancient discipline, which dates back at least 2,000 years, has much more to offer the modern world. The universal principles which the alchemists discovered apply to all levels of the physical, mental, and spiritual realms. Whether you are working in an artist's studio or a boardroom, in a lab developing healing tinctures, or in a clinic as a therapist, or in the inner laboratory of your own soul and spirit, alchemical techniques will help you make the transformations you desire. The art of transformation reveals the hidden chemistry of change underlying an enormous variety of subjects ranging from psychological transformation and personal relationships to the formation of stars and planetary systems. In fact, alchemy has achieved more respect today from the general public and among scholars than at any time in the last 400 years. Swiss psychologist Dr. Carl Jung, 1875 to 1961, is credited with returning alchemy to its rightful stature in academia with his development of depth psychology, which he based on the universal symbols of alchemy that appeared in his patients' dreams. Jung made the ancient operations of alchemy viable tools in helping his patients achieve psychological wholeness. Even in such unexpected areas as economics, one can find many serious works crediting the effectiveness of alchemical principles. Recently, H.C. Binswanger, director of the Institute of Economics and Ecology at the University of St. Gallen, Switzerland, wrote a breakthrough book called Money in Magic, in which he urged economists to stop using the term mainstream economics and substitute alchemical economics as a more descriptive name. He contends that economics developed more as a form of alchemy than finance. While putting the job title of alchemist on your resume may not bring in a flood of offers, thinking of yourself as a practicing alchemist in the workplace can bring unexpected rewards and advancement. So let's look at the different kinds of modern alchemy and see how they can help you get ahead in the world. Thoth's tips. An entertaining way to grasp the basic principles of alchemy is to read some of the many novels devoted to the topic. Among the best are Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist, Russell House's The Portal, Patrick Harpur's Mercurius, Fidelis Morgan's Unnatural Fire, Maria Sepp's The Red Lion, J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series, Margaret Mayhew's Alchemy, and Michael Scott's The Alchemist. The kinds of alchemy. Because in the most basic terms, alchemy is the art of transformation, the best way to study the different aspects of alchemy is to focus on what is being transformed and then devote our attention to these types of alchemy throughout the rest of the book. Spiritual alchemy. The most popular reason for studying alchemy today is to reconnect with spiritual realities. In this approach to alchemy, the gold of the alchemist is not common metal gold, but an inner spiritual gold. Using meditation to penetrate the symbolic imagery of alchemy, the seeker attempts to transform the dark, heavy, karmic lead of the soul into bright, purified, and incorruptible gold of spirit. I discussed the techniques of spiritual alchemy in Chapter 19. Karmic is a term that comes from the Hindu word karma, which means actions, and refers to the cumulative effects our deeds have on ourselves and others. In spiritual alchemy, karma is the burden of the soul, carried from past incarnations as well as the effects of our present actions. By becoming free of karma through special meditations, good deeds, and purification of thoughts, a person can overcome original sin and return to a golden state of innocence and incorruptibility. Psychological alchemy. Alchemy not only gave birth to chemistry, but also to modern psychology. The alchemists were the first to treat psychological problems as chemical imbalances in the body. They believed the powers of the metals were expressed in humans as our basic instincts and emotions, and these could be transformed into the nobler aspects of reason and enlightenment through alchemical processes. Carl Jung did groundbreaking work in this area of alchemy, and you'll learn more about his work in Chapter 18. Artistic alchemy. Throughout history, alchemy has had a tremendous influence in the creative arts. Early Egyptian alchemists were experts at capturing essence in oils and perfumes and applying colors and metals to jewelry and sculptures. Today, many artists working with metal, glass, enamels, perfumes, and other media consider themselves part of the alchemical tradition and adhere to its principles. Alchemical art tends to use materials in ways that make them appear to be something else, thus revealing their essence in unexpected ways. We can also find similar transformative staging in alchemical literature, music, and even software games. Many filmmakers follow the principles of alchemy to add psychological depth and archetypal power to their films. Workers from Paramount Studios even set up an Alchemy in Film panel in the late 1990s to assist writers in understanding alchemy. Films like 2001 and 2010, like Water for Chocolate, The Fifth Element, The Matrix, Revelation, Full Metal Alchemist, and The Da Vinci Code are just a few examples where the creators have made conscious use of alchemy in the plotline. Social alchemy. In the last century, the term alchemy became the slogan and rallying point for a variety of movements driven by the human desire to change adverse conditions. These endeavors included trying to change slavery into freedom, sin into grace, folly into wisdom, poverty into wealth, fear into courage, war into peace, sterility into fertility, bureaucracy into democracy, disease into health, and death into immortality. All these social movements borrowed alchemical terms and principles to focus their efforts at changing the status quo. Chapter 22 tells you more about social alchemy. Practical alchemy. Practical alchemy deals with the production of tinctures, tonics, oils, compounds, and elixirs that capture healing energy. Such laboratory work also focuses on creating mineral transformations and perfecting the materials commonly associated with changing lead into gold. Practical alchemy reached its heyday in Europe in the Middle Ages, but in the last 50 years, this kind of work has staged a noticeable resurgence. In fact, according to the International Alchemy Guild, more licensed practical alchemists exist today than at any time in history. In Part 4, we delve into this intriguing topic and teach you a bit of kitchen alchemy along the way. Therapeutic alchemy. During the last century, we have seen the proliferation of a new breed of alchemical practitioners who focus on ancient healing modalities. Techniques such as alchemical hypnotherapy, dream therapy, and shamanic journeying use imagery to direct or stimulate healing energy. Oriental alchemical arts like yoga, aikido, tai chi, qigong, tantra, acupuncture, and reiki have seen a profound increase in Western culture. Alchemical bodywork like chiropractics, Rolfing, Feldenkrais, bioenergetics, and polarity therapy have their origin in the work of 19th century alchemists seeking to isolate the life force. Most modern holistic disciplines like homeopathy, herbology, naturopathy, Ayurveda, Chinese medicine, aromatherapy, and reflexology trace their origins in ancient alchemical teachings, and even New Age astrologers, numerologists, and tarot readers owe their livelihoods to Egyptian and Babylonian alchemists. We study some of these fascinating traditions in more detail in Chapter 2. Tread carefully. Don't be confused by the wide variety of possible alchemical transformations. For an alchemist, no real distinction exists between the different kinds of transformations, because the myriad of things in our world are all manifestations of just one thing, the universal mind at the source of creation. By focusing on this single divine spark in all things, the alchemist hopes to reveal the essence of a substance or situation and guide its growth to a natural state of perfection. We learn much more about this philosophy in Part 2. The perennial philosophy. One of the reasons for the endurance of alchemy through the ages is that it's based on a fundamental philosophy that has itself exhibited tremendous staying power in the human mind. The alchemists called it the one true philosophy of the world, and believe it was first revealed to humanity in ancient Egypt. It is also known as the perennial philosophy because down through history it has always resurfaced in some form despite many successful attempts by orthodox authorities to suppress it. The basic idea of the perennial philosophy is that there are certain universal truths common to all cultures and systems of knowledge. The German mathematician Gottfried Leibniz first used the term in this sense, when he defined it as the eternal philosophy that underlies all religions. The term, further refined by 20th century philosopher Aldous Huxley, has come to mean the most basic and everlasting universal truths sensed by all human beings. In other words, down through history, people in many different cultures and times have experienced similar feelings about the nature of reality and the meaning of existence. Differences arise only when some authority attempts to control or adapt these basic ideas into a rigid system of behavior. In this view, the world's nations and religions are constantly fighting each other over minor, cultural variations in the same basic belief system. Unlike dogmatic religion, which encourages these petty sectarian disputes, the perennial philosophy states that there are as many roads to God as there are people in the world. The three fundamental tenets of alchemy and the perennial philosophy of which it is part are: 1. The material world is not the only reality. Another hidden level of reality exists that determines our existence. The physical world is a shadow or projection of a higher reality that cannot be grasped by the senses. Only the higher faculties of the human mind and spirit can perceive it. 2. The basic duality of material versus non-material realities is mirrored in human beings. Our material body is subject to the physical laws of birth and death. Our non-material body, called soul or spirit, is not subject to decay or loss and carries the essence of who we are. This divine energy at the heart of everything is known as quintessence, the fifth element in alchemy, or the life force in most other traditions. 3. All human beings possess the capacity to perceive these separate levels of reality, both in themselves and in nature, but we are taught to ignore the subtle clues to this greater reality. The perception and application of this ultimate truth is the goal of human beings and the purpose of our existence. What makes alchemy different from other mystical systems that are part of the perennial philosophy is that alchemy attempts to apply this wisdom in practical ways in the everyday world. No other discipline has taken such a down-to-earth and in-your-face approach to working with these mystical principles. That approach, unfortunately, got a lot of alchemists burnt at the stake. But it also makes alchemy a unique and powerful discipline, a combination of religion and science that makes a lot of sense to people trying to remain true to themselves in the modern world. You find more about being alchemist in today's world in Part 6. Becoming an alchemist. In the past, becoming an alchemist began with a long apprenticeship or training period that traditionally involved a very specific path of initiation. In the ancient mystery schools, the teachings were arranged into 3 levels of mastery: the philosophicum, knowing what is really there; the theoreticum, knowing how it works; the practicum, knowing how to do it. Definition. Adept is from the Latin word adeptus, meaning having attained mastery of a subject. Alchemists coined the term in the 1660s to refer specifically to someone who had learned the secret of transforming base metals into gold. Today, it is used to mean anyone who is skilled in the secrets of anything. Obviously, initiatory alchemy was a very personal process that usually involved a one-on-one relationship with an adept that lasted many years. Modern teaching of alchemy takes place at a faster pace on all 3 levels of initiation at once. On the philosophical level, the objective is to achieve an awareness of the lower and the higher worlds in which the alchemist works. The goal of the theoretical work is to understand how to interact and control the unseen energies of those realms. The practical work is concerned with learning the personal and laboratory techniques of transformation and is in turn presented in 3 phases: the plant work, the mineral work, and the animal work. This kind of total immersion program takes commitment on the part of both teacher and student, and the biggest danger is that the student will not be fully initiated. Unfortunately, there is no Hogwarts School of Alchemy prepared to give students the kind of personal attention they need for true initiation. Nonetheless, we do have a number of workable alternatives for persons seeking formal instruction in alchemy. The International Alchemy Guild is a good place to inquire about practicing alchemists who take on students in your area. Find contact information for the Guild and other groups mentioned here in Appendix A. Some graduates of the Paracelsus Research Society still take on students. The institute, originally based in Colorado, was formed by alchemist Albert Riedel, known as Frater Albertus and author of The Alchemist's Handbook. Unfortunately, the premier school for practical alchemy in the United States closed its doors in 1984 when Riedel died. Dr. Joseph Lysewski, who founded Paracelsus College in 1982, carried on his work in Australia. The school has a 7-year curriculum of plant, mineral, and animal alchemy. Before it closed in 2000, the Philosophers of Nature offered a 2-year course in plant work and a 7-year course in mineral work. The course manuals are still available from Triad Publishing. French alchemist Jean Dubois wrote the material, which was taught by American alchemists Russ and Sue House. The Institute for Hermetic Studies of Pennsylvania, under the direction of author Mark Stavish, offers seminars on mineral and plant alchemy, as do practicing alchemists Paul Bartscher and Micah Nilsson of Alchemy in Oregon. John Reed offers a free online course on plant alchemy, and Scottish archivist Adam McLean offers several online courses in deciphering alchemical symbols. The Rosicrucian Order, Ancient Mystical Order Rosicrucius, or AMORC, in San Jose, California, sometimes offers summer classes in plant and mineral alchemy, though they are open to members only, and membership is very expensive. The largest school of alchemy in the world, with over 500 students in 12 countries, is Flamel College of California, whose director of practical alchemy is Robert Allen Bartlett, a student of Frater Albertus and his chief chemist. Flamel College offers certification in practical and spiritual alchemy, a diploma in alchemy, and is the only organization actually hiring alchemists. Although it occasionally holds on-site classes, most of the instruction is done by correspondence study. The 7 modules in its Alchemy Home Study program include all necessary labware, herbs, and chemicals. The least you need to know. The simplest and most accepted definition of alchemy is that it is the art of transformation. Today, the principles of alchemy can be found at work in psychology, business management, art, literature, filmmaking, software development, and many other creative endeavors. Modern alchemy consists of 6 branches: spiritual, psychological, artistic, social, practical, and therapeutic. Alchemy is part of the perennial philosophy, the basic tenet of all which holds that certain universal truths are common to all cultures and belief systems. One can receive formal training in alchemy, though the apprenticeship tradition has largely given way to correspondence and online training. Chapter 2: The First Alchemists. In this chapter, ancient alchemical manuscripts, a gift from the gods, Thoth, the father of alchemy, the mysterious pillars of Hermes, secrets of the Emerald Tablet, and the line between myth and reality. The roots of alchemy are buried in legend and mystery. Allegedly, the earliest books on alchemy appeared all at once, as if they had been locked away for safekeeping and were suddenly released. At the beginning of the first millennium, all around the world, alchemical principles exploded into human consciousness, and these same ideas continue to inspire us to this day. However, alchemists point to the heavens, not books, for the origin of their craft, and ancient Egyptian writings seem to back them up. 3,000-year-old scrolls describe visitors from the firmament who came to Egypt and shared their knowledge of the universe, including the art of alchemy. One document contains a succinct summary of that ancient wisdom. It was engraved on a green crystalline tablet that became known as the Emerald Tablet. And in this chapter, we use the Emerald Tablet to grasp the philosophy behind alchemy. Lost gems of knowledge. The first known alchemy books appeared almost simultaneously in Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, and China over 2,000 years ago, and most modern historians date the birth of alchemy to that period. This was the era of the Great Library at Alexandria, and ships visiting the busy Egyptian port carried alchemical manuscripts around the world. However, those early writings quote even more ancient texts and referred to a lost tradition that goes back to the dawn of civilization. All we can say with certainty is that by 300 CE, the principles of alchemy were widely accepted by philosophers, priests, and craftsmen in civilized nations around the globe. Hundreds of parchment scrolls, clay tablets, and papyri existed that dealt with alchemical principles and processes. Yet to this day, the true source of that knowledge remains unknown. Although references to alchemical principles are found in Egyptian scrolls dating back to 15,000 BCE, the original canon of texts from which those principles were derived had vanished. The early alchemy manuscripts that have survived are remarkably similar in style and seem to originate from a common source. All are written in a strange, convoluted style with obscure references to pre-existing concepts, and are filled with secret ciphers and cryptic symbols for which no explanation is given. The gods of alchemy. Despite the difficulty in pinning down the historical source of alchemy, the answer to the question of where alchemy came from is almost unanimous among alchemists. Most alchemists agree that their art originated in Egypt during a time known as Zep Tepi. In this tradition, alchemy is literally a gift from the gods. Definition: Zep Tepi is an ancient Egyptian phrase meaning first time. It refers to an epoch over 12,000 years ago when divine beings arrived through the void to settle in Egypt. The gods shared their wisdom and civilized the primitive humans. According to legend, a contingent of godlike beings settled in Egypt and exhibited an advanced spiritual technology that enabled them to transform matter. These angelic visitors were the first alchemists. They practiced their art in Hormanothi, a temple hidden near the Nile River. According to hieroglyphic texts, the visitors originated from different levels in the firmament, and their bodies were more subtle than humans. Whether for purposes of breeding or out of sheer lust, the visitors were described as unable to resist the temptations of the flesh and desperately wanted to marry young women and have children. The results of these unions were described as giants who had dominion over the earth and its creatures. Oddly, the idea of angelic visitors lusting after humans is part of many religious texts around the world. Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 5 describes fallen angels who wanted to have children with the daughters of men. In exchange, they taught men magic and metallurgy and how to make tinctures to capture the essence of plants. The story is elaborated in considerable detail in the Old Testament apocryphal book of Enoch. Who were these mysterious visitors to Egypt? Zosimus, the father of Greek alchemy who lived in Alexandria around 300 CE, wrote that fallen angels who had children with humans taught mankind alchemy and all the arts of nature, and he insisted the legends predated history and were literally true. Tertullian and many early Hermetic writers spoke of this same superhuman race and their interactions with humans. The alchemist Clement of Alexandria said the visitors laid bare the secrets of the metals, understood the virtues of plants, and the force of magical incantations, and their learning even extended to the science of the stars. In an ancient Egyptian text called Isis, the prophetess to her son Horus, Isis begins teaching her son the principles of alchemy and tells him how she acquired her skills. According to her story, she had gone to Hormanothi to learn the sacred art and met one of the visitors, who was overcome by physical lust for her. Isis agreed to satisfy his hunger if he would disclose the secrets, but he refused. Eventually, she met a visitor named Amniel, who agreed to her demands, and Isis was initiated into the mysteries of alchemy. According to legend, Isis, her brother and sister, her husband Osiris, and 5 similar divine beings settled at Heliopolis, which became the center for alchemy in Egypt. The myths of Isis and Osiris help explain the mysteries of alchemy and are retold many times in the writing of alchemists. We cannot determine whether these ancient myths contain any literal truth, but there is no doubt that the alchemists felt they imparted deep wisdom about the true origin of their craft. Thoth tips. Over 150,000 books have been published on alchemy, and it is estimated that through history, more books have been written on alchemy than any other topic. If you're interested in learning more, the books listed in Appendix A are a good place to start. Thoth, the father of alchemy. Thoth was one of the godlike beings who came to Egypt during the time of Zep Tepi. However, there is an important difference between Thoth and the other gods of Egypt. Thoth exists on all levels of time and space, in heaven and on earth and in between. He has always existed and always will. He spoke the first word of creation, and all he has to do is name a thing to bring it into existence. Thoth brought the very first gods into being, yet he is content to serve both the gods and mankind. Thoth is a divine intermediary between spirit and matter that makes alchemy possible. The Egyptians considered Thoth the first scribe, the inventor of language and writing who recorded the ancient teachings in hundreds of books. Because of this, Thoth is considered the father of many disciplines, including alchemy, mathematics, agriculture, music, magic, religion, science, and medicine. Most of the scrolls attributed to him were preserved in the Great Library at Alexandria. In the writings of Thoth, alchemy is presented as a unique spiritual science, a merging of science and religion that requires a balanced blending of heart, body, and mind. Most often depicted as a man with the head of an ibis, a tall wading bird with a long curved beak, Thoth was also associated with baboons and apes, which is taken as a symbol of his divine mission to raise our animal nature to new levels of enlightenment. Thoth was known as the revealer of the hidden and Lord of rebirth, and was considered the initiator of human transformation. One of Thoth's scrolls, from which fragments remain, is called the Book of Breathings, which teaches humans how to become gods through spells and control of the breath. Thoth is also considered the author of the Book of the Dead, which guides the departed through the underworld into the light. It is said the lost Book of Thoth was written in his own hand. The script consisted of strange symbols that elevated the reader's consciousness to directly experience the presence of the gods. The book revealed the true story of the creation of mankind and described an afterlife in the stars for those who followed his teachings. The Pillars of Hermes. According to legend, Thoth preserved his canon of writings inside two great pillars just before the Great Flood inundated the world. Thousands of years later, the pillars were rediscovered. According to existing texts written by Egyptian priests, one of the pillars was discovered outside the city of Heliopolis, and the other was unearthed near Thebes. The massive columns were covered with sacred hieroglyphics. When first discovered, they were referred to as the Pillars of the Gods of the Dawning Light. The pillars were eventually moved to a secret temple dedicated to the first gods. Some texts indicate that this location was the Temple of Amun in Siwa, which is the oldest temple in Egypt. Only priests and pharaohs were allowed to view the sacred objects and scrolls. Some evidence suggests the pillars really existed. Not only were they described in scrolls dating back to 1550 BCE, but they also were periodically put on public display and have been mentioned by credible sources throughout history. Solon, the Greek legislator and writer, studied them firsthand and noted that they memorialized the destruction of an ancient advanced civilization. The great historian Herodotus encountered two pillars in a secret Egyptian temple he visited in 400 BCE. One pillar was of pure gold, said Herodotus, and the other was as of emerald, which glowed at night with great brilliancy. Because Hermes is the Greek name for Thoth, he named them the Pillars of Hermes. The mysterious Pillars of Hermes were said to have been viewed by Alexander the Great, Achilles Tatius, Dio, Chrysostom, and Laertius, and other Roman and Greek historians have described them in detail. In Iamblichus on the Mysteries, Thomas Taylor quotes one ancient writer who noted that the two pillars were created before the Great Flood. The Alexandrian scribe Manetho recorded that the pillars contained 36,525 manuscripts written by Thoth, although it should be noted that this figure is the exact number of days in 100 years, which symbolized perfect completion to the Egyptians. The Emerald Tablet. When opened, Thoth's pillars were said to contain not only many priceless manuscripts, but also a marvelous artifact that had become known as the Emerald Tablet. The green crystalline tablet carried a succinct summary of the Thothian writings and outlined a new philosophy of the whole universe. The priests of Amun kept the tablet and other texts in hiding, but its philosophy filtered down into other writings. Phrases from the Emerald Tablet can be found in the Papyrus of Ani and chapters from the Book of the Dead. The Berlin Papyrus number 3024, and other religious scrolls dating between 1000 and 300 BCE. One papyrus, known as An Invocation to Hermes, which dates from Hellenic Egypt, actually refers to the tablet. I know your names in the Egyptian tongue, and your true name as it is written on the holy tablet in the holy place at Hermopolis, where you did have your birth. Not until Alexander the Great conquered Egypt and became its pharaoh in 332 BCE did knowledge of the tablet's existence spread. Historical documents show that Alexander traveled to Siwa, where he retrieved the writings of Thoth and the tablet. He then took the items with him to Memphis and then on to Hermopolis. The Emerald Tablet. In truth, without deceit, certain and most veritable. That which is below corresponds to that which is above, and that which is above corresponds to that which is below, to accomplish the miracles of the one thing. And just as all things have come from this one thing, through the meditation of one mind, so do all created things originate from this one thing through transformation. Its father is the sun, its mother the moon. The wind carries in its belly its nurse to the earth. It is the origin of all, the consecration of the universe. Its inherent strength is perfected if it is turned into earth. Separate the earth from fire, the subtle from the gross, gently and with great ingenuity. It rises from earth to heaven and descends again to earth, thereby combining within itself the powers of both the above and the below. Thus will you obtain the glory of the whole universe. All obscurity will be clear to you. This is the greatest force of all powers, because it overcomes every subtle thing and penetrates every solid thing. In this way was the universe created. From this comes many wondrous applications, because this is the pattern. Therefore I am called thrice greatest Hermes, having all three parts of the wisdom of the whole universe. Herein have I completely explained the operation of the sun. The treasures of Alexander. The pillars of Hermes were said to contain over 300 skulls in addition to the emerald tablet, and reports indicate that Alexander moved them to the temple of Heliopolis in 332 BCE and put them on public display. Researcher Manly P. Hall found fragments of a letter from one traveler who had seen the emerald tablet in Heliopolis. "It is a precious stone, like an emerald," wrote the man, "whereon these characters are represented in bas relief, not engraved into the stone. It is esteemed above 2,000 years old. Plainly the matter of this emerald had once been in a fluid state like melted glass, and had been cast in a mold, and to this flux the artist had given the hardness of a natural and genuine emerald by his art." Hermetic scholars believe that Alexander built the great library at Alexandria primarily to house and study the Thothian materials, and the writings of a scribe from the temple of Heliopolis confirm that view. His name was Manetho, which means gift of Thoth, and he was one of the first scribes allowed access to the contents of the pillars. He wrote that the writings were more than 9,000 years old and contained the sum of all knowledge. Unfortunately, only a few of Manetho's works survived the burning of the great library at Alexandria. Some of his letters to Ptolemy II survived, as well as one of his books called Sothis. In that book, Manetho wrote, "After the great flood, the hieroglyphic texts written by Thoth were translated from the sacred language into Greek and deposited in books in the sanctuaries of Egyptian temples." Definition. Hermetic refers to the writings of Hermes, the Greek god and mythic alchemist associated with Thoth. Known for his ability to keep secrets, Hermes had the magical power to seal treasure chests so that nothing could get inside. Our term hermetically sealed, meaning airtight or impenetrable, refers to this ability. Manetho wrote that the magical book of Thoth, written in the hand of Thoth himself, was kept in a locked gold box in the inner sanctuary of the temple at Hermopolis, and only one priest at a time was entrusted with the key. According to some historians, an occult brotherhood known as the Sons of Horus was formed before the Arab invasion of Egypt to preserve Thoth's books and his other teachings, as well as the complete works of Manetho. The alchemist Clement of Alexandria was given access to the secret documents around 170 CE, but that is the last recorded reference to this original material. The fate of the Emerald Tablet. When Alexander left Egypt in 331 BCE, he headed north to Cappadocia and Mesopotamia. According to some reports, he took the treasures from the Pillars of Hermes and stored them in an underground cavern in Cappadocia. Alexander went on to conquer all the remaining territory from Babylonia to India, but died on the return trip in 323 BCE. Alexander's final wish was to be buried near the temple at Siwa in Egypt, but his tomb has never been found. The legend picks up again in Cappadocia in 32 CE, when a young boy named Belinus was exploring caves outside the city of Tyana and discovered the ancient texts hidden by Alexander. The precocious lad took a 5-year vow of silence as he absorbed the materials and then sought out teachers versed in Hermetic philosophy to complete his education. He became known as Apollonius of Tyana and was renowned for his magical skills and healing abilities. He is said to have returned the tablet to Alexandria around 70 CE and made the enlightened city his home. He wrote most of his books in Alexandria, though he continued to travel the world, inspiring everyone he met with his great wisdom. As for the Emerald Tablet, a few reports record it was buried for safekeeping in a vault on the Giza Plateau around 400 CE, but no trace of it has ever been found. No one knows for sure if there is such an artifact as the Emerald Tablet, but several expeditions have been undertaken to search for it. From The Alchemist. The earliest surviving translation of the Emerald Tablet is in the Arabic Book of Belinus the Wise on Causes, which was written around 700 CE. Several Arabic translations made their way to Europe with the Moorish invasion of Spain in 771 CE. The first Latin translation appeared in 1140 in a book by Johannes Hispalensis called Book of the Secrets of Creation. After the alchemist Albertus Magnus issued several more translations in the mid-1200s, the Emerald Tablet spread like wildfire. Most European alchemists had a copy and constantly referred to the secret formula it contained. The legend of Thoth/Hermes. In the history of alchemy, the line between myth and reality has always been blurred. To the Egyptians, Thoth, the father of alchemy, was a divine being, the custodian of all knowledge, and intermediary between heaven and earth. However, several modern authors have looked at the evidence and concluded that Thoth was a real person, a survivor from the lost continent of Atlantis, or even an extraterrestrial. Yet his mythic status cannot be denied. The Romans identified Thoth with Mercury, their winged god who carried messages between gods and men. In fact, nearly every ancient culture has some mythic figure that can be associated with Thoth. To the Greeks, Thoth became Hermes, a priest, philosopher, and alchemist who lived in Egypt around the time of Moses. His Latin name, Hermes Trismegistus, means thrice greatest Hermes, and refers to his unique mastery of all 3 levels of reality: the physical, the spiritual, and mental planes of earth, heaven, and everything in between. He was viewed as a gentle teacher, much more accessible than Thoth. In fact, 13 manuscripts known as the Corpus Hermeticum are attributed to him. These alchemical and esoteric teachings from the Alexandrian period were unknown in the West until 1471, when the Italian astrologer Marsilio Ficino translated them into Latin. Many alchemists believe Hermes Trismegistus was a real person who supposedly lived for centuries and traveled throughout the world. Because so many later authors wrote under his name, it may have seemed like Hermes lived for hundreds of years. Nevertheless, historical documents attest to his presence in Ceylon, India, and Babylonia, where the Arabs venerated him as the person to have shared his knowledge of the art of alchemy. The Staff of Hermes. The primary symbol of Hermes is the caduceus, and a strange Greek legend relates how he came to possess it. One day, a Greek seer named Tiresias was hiking on Mount Kyllene and discovered 2 snakes copulating alongside the road. In an effort to separate the snakes, he stuck his walking staff between them. Immediately, Tiresias was turned into a woman and remained so for 7 years, until once again he found 2 copulating serpents and separated them with his staff. At that moment, Tiresias transformed back into a man. The magical staff, complete with the entwined snakes, was considered too dangerous for anyone to use and was hidden in a cave on Mount Kylene. The cave, marked by an upright stone phallus, would eventually become the birthplace and home of Hermes. While still a young man, he found the caduceus and eventually learned to harness its power for healing. Definition. The caduceus is a staff with two serpents entwined in opposite directions around it. They were considered the most fundamental form, and because they shed their skins, were thought to possess the secret of immortality. The coiled serpent symbolizes the divine fire or reservoir of life force in the body. The caduceus is often shown with two wings, which represents the purified or ascended life force. The caduceus bears a striking resemblance to the double helix of proteins that make up DNA, which is the basic blueprint of all life. Several modern authors have suggested that this similarity is a clue that Thoth or someone associated with him manipulated our genetic structure to speed up human evolution within the last 40,000 years. Today, Hermes' staff has become the chief logo of the medical profession, and there are certainly more representations of the Hermetic symbol in the world today than at any other time in history. Scholars insist it all began with the Greek healer Asclepius, who adopted the caduceus to symbolize healing, though the connection goes back much farther to the original Hermes. The Ebers Papyrus, a 68-foot-long scroll that is the oldest surviving book in the world, tells us, "Man's guide is Thoth, who bestows on him the gifts of speech, who makes the books and illumines those who are learned therein, and the physicians who follow him that they may work cures." Hermetic philosophy. The esoteric teachings of Thoth and Hermes make up the philosophical foundations of alchemy, and these ideas are summarized in the Emerald Tablet. Take a moment to read the tablet and try to absorb its meaning before consulting any other sources. It often helps to rewrite the tablet in your own words. Nearly every medieval alchemist from Albertus Magnus to Isaac Newton had his own version of the Emerald Tablet that guided him in his work. Perhaps the easiest way to grasp the principles expressed in the Emerald Tablet is by viewing them pictorially. Renaissance alchemists spent many hours meditating on the Hermetic symbols depicted in a stunning engraving called Tabula Smaragdina, which is Latin for Emerald Tablet. Created by artist Matthew Marion, it was first published in 1618 in Daniel Mylius's Opus Medico Chimicum, the medical chemical work. Let's take a short tour of this engraving to gather some basic insights to deepen your understanding of the Emerald Tablet. The first thing you notice about this engraving is its sharp division into the above and below sections. The above is the spiritual realm of light and divine union, while the below is the material realm of matter and duality. Next, we see two great suns rising over the horizon. The larger sun in the background is the ineffable One Mind, whose rays encompass the whole universe. In front of this is a smaller sun known as Mind the Maker. This we can think of as the mind of nature or the physical laws of the created world. Mind the Maker is an important and controversial Hermetic concept that would have gotten you burnt at the stake if you had spoken of it in the Middle Ages. It implies that the ultimate God does not directly participate in our world. Instead, the Word of God was projected into our reality like a template or computer program, what the Emerald Tablet calls the pattern. In the drawing, these crystallized thoughts of God are represented by the angels embedded in the smaller sun. This humanistic concept does not mean the alchemists did not believe in God. On the contrary, they sought to reveal and perfect the original divine light in everything. This is the true nature of the great work, and it begins below in the duality of matter. From The Alchemist. The principles in the Emerald Tablet are recognized by many modern movements, such as Eckankar and The Secret, and are a part of the teachings of most esoteric organizations, such as the Rosicrucians and Golden Dawn. For instance, one famous text on Freemasonry, morals, and dogma says, He who desires to attain the understanding of the grand word and the possession of the great secret must take for the key of the allegories the single dogma of Hermes, contained in his tablet of emerald. We see the duality of our existence in the division of the below into left and right sections. On the left is the daytime realm of solar energy and masculine symbols. On the right is the nighttime realm of lunar energy and feminine symbols. At the center of the below is the hermaphroditic Hermes, who wields two starry axes. He has cut the chains that bind us to the world below and realizes the full power of the archetypal forces above. At the heart of the engraving is a bullseye target depicting the one thing of the universe. The 7 layers of this sphere must be peeled away like an onion to reveal the hidden essence or soul of matter. The least you need to know. The mythic origins of alchemy go back to ancient Egypt during a period known as Zep-Tepi. Thoth is considered the father of alchemy, and his teachings were passed down to us sealed in the fabled Pillars of Hermes. Hermes is the Greek god associated with Thoth and was known as Hermes Trismegistus in medieval Europe. The Emerald Tablet is a succinct summary of Hermetic philosophy and alchemical principles. Chapter 3. The Land of Chem. In this chapter, the early history of alchemy, Alexandria, world center of alchemy, the destruction of alchemy manuscripts, the growth of alchemy in China and India, the Arabs saved alchemy. The word alchemy derives from the Arabic phrase alchemia, which literally means from the land of Chem. Chem is an Egyptian term that describes the fertile black soil found in the Nile River Delta. So the Arab alchemia referred to the origin of alchemy in Egypt and alludes to the mysterious and secretive black arts of the ancient Egyptians. Our word chemistry did not appear until the 17th century. It derives from the same root but has come to be associated with only the laboratory side of the alchemist's work. The land of Chem was the birthplace and home to alchemy for at least 5,000 years. Specifically, scholars considered Egyptian alchemy to span the centuries from 5000 BCE to 350 BCE. This was followed by a period of Greek alchemy in Egypt from the arrival of Alexander the Great in 332 BCE to the Arabian invasion in 642 CE. Arabian alchemy flourished for another 500 years before the heyday of alchemy began in Europe. The inhabitants of the land of Chem were amazingly advanced in metallurgy and chemical knowledge. Egyptian goldsmiths had mastered their craft by 3000 BCE, and sophisticated operations such as smelting, fusion, alloying, and precise weighing of gold and other metals are depicted on tomb walls dating from 2500 BCE. Egypt's eastern desert is rich in gold deposit, and maps dating back to 1400 BCE show gold mining regions there. By 1300 BCE, Egyptian craftsmen were producing gold and copper of greater than 99.9% purity. From the earliest times, Egyptians were also skilled at such alchemical processes as extraction of essential oils from plants, dyeing and glass tinting, and the fermentation of fruit juices, honey, and malt beverages. How the Egyptians became so advanced in such a short time is one of the greatest mysteries of alchemy. Secrets of priests and craftsmen. To the priests and craftsmen of ancient Egypt, the principles of alchemy were a divine revelation whose secrecy they had to maintain at all costs. Ostracism and death were the punishments for sharing the sacred wisdom with the common people. Even the pharaohs had to pass through levels of initiation before the secrets were shared with them. As stated in Chapter 2, the ancient teachings of Thoth were kept concealed from the people until Alexander the Great became Pharaoh of Egypt in 332 BCE. According to early historians, Alexander made the dangerous journey across the Libyan desert to the temple of Amun at Siwa, where the writings of Thoth were hidden. He took the tablets and scrolls to the temple of Heliopolis near modern Cairo and stored them in the sacred archives there. After securing the scrolls, Alexander personally laid out the boundaries for the new city of Alexandria, where a library would be built to house and study the texts. He then assembled a diverse group of priests, alchemists, and other scholars to prepare Greek translations. Alexandria, center of ancient alchemy. Alchemists from around the world visited Alexandria to consult the library scrolls and confer with other alchemists. Even the earliest Greek alchemical writings from Alexandria are full of references to Chinese, Indian, Babylonian, Hebrew, and Persian alchemists and their traditions. Eastern influences of meditation, mind development, Vedic astrology, and Oriental magic are obvious in the writings of Alexandrians. This high-minded merging of philosophies invigorated and strengthened alchemy, allowing it to survive the coming Dark Ages and bloom in medieval Europe. The first alchemist of record in Alexandria was Bolos of Mendes, a sorcerer who lived there around 300 BCE. He was a follower of Democritus, a Greek philosopher who originated the atomic theory of matter. Bolos wrote important treatises on the techniques of tinging metals, chemistry, and astrology, and presented a system of sympathetic magic based on how deeply aware the sorcerer could become of the hidden forces of nature. In Bolos's most influential work, On Natural and Mystical Things, he describes the discovery of an ancient text hidden within a great column that dealt with the universal harmony of nature. Many believe this is the first recorded reference to the Emerald Tablet. Bolos is credited with creating the science of alchemy by joining philosophy and theory with practical demonstrations and experimentation. He wrote that there existed 4 branches of practical experimentation: gold, silver, precious stones, and dyes. From The Alchemist. One passage from On Natural and Mystical Things became a fundamental motto of alchemists for the next 2,000 years. Nature rejoices in nature. Nature conquers nature. Nature masters nature. This revered alchemist, Zosimus, explained how Bolos' motto applies to the work of alchemists, who are themselves part of nature. We can proceed with the transmutation of common metal into noble metal by working alloys or by purifying the metals, while at the same time basing ourselves on the affinity between metals and knowing their sympathies and antipathies. Raw material, sympathy, transmutation by qualitative change of the colors. We have thus the principles that constitute alchemy. Another sorcerer alchemist from Alexandria and a contemporary of Bolos was the Persian Ostanes of Medes. He was one of the first alchemists to identify the elixir of life, which he described as a divine water that cured all maladies. He had a great influence on early alchemists and is mentioned many times in early scrolls as an authority on alchemy. He personally taught other alchemists, including Pseudo-Democritus, who wrote many early alchemical texts. He would eventually become the personal alchemist for Alexander the Great. The most famous and respected of the Alexandrian alchemists was Zosimus. Arabian alchemists revered him as the universal wise man with the brilliant flame. In his alchemical experiments, Zosimus worked closely with his sister Theosebia, and around 250 CE, he wrote a 28-volume alchemy encyclopedia. Fortunately, most of his encyclopedia survived the burning of the Great Library of Alexandria and provides us with much of our knowledge of how the ancients practiced their art. Zosimus wrote many other books, including the Book of Images and important commentaries on astrology, magic, and theology. Like Bolos, Zosimus noted that alchemy had its roots in sacred hieroglyphs engraved on ancient pillars, but he emphasized that it was absolutely forbidden to divulge the exact text to the uninitiated. Zosimus was a member of the Gnostics, an early group of Christians who formed in the 1st century. He believed that one could only obtain true knowledge of the divine by direct experience and not from religious authorities. He felt that the great work of alchemy was to perfect the alchemist himself, and that such work would bring out the divinity in both man and nature. With Zosimus, Alexandrian alchemy took a new direction that emphasized its mystical principles. Another important figure in Alexandria was Manetho, a priest and scribe who lived there during the reigns of Ptolemy I and Ptolemy II. Records indicate Manetho supervised many important religious projects in Egypt and lived for more than 80 years. Among Manetho's surviving books are the Sacred Book, On Antiquity and Religion, and the Digest of Physics. He also wrote an encyclopedia of Egyptian history that is considered the most complete and authoritative on record. Manetho's name literally means gift of Thoth, but he was also known by the name Ma'ani Jehuti, which means I have seen Thoth. As noted in Chapter 2, Manetho was instrumental in translating and interpreting the ancient scrolls attributed to Thoth, and is believed by some to have been the first translator of the Emerald Tablet. Two female alchemists in Alexandria earned the lasting respect of alchemists down through the ages. The first, Maria Prophetessa, also known as Mary the Jewess, lived around 200 BCE. She invented many early alchemical devices, including the bain-marie, Mary's bath, which is a double boiler water bath that eventually distributes heat to substances. She also invented the kerotakis apparatus, a closed vessel in which thin leaves of copper and other metals were exposed to the action of various vapors, such as sulfur and mercury. She discovered hydrochloric acid and was famous for her Mary's black, which she formed by fusing sulfur with a lead-copper alloy. From The Alchemist. Mary Prophetessa was famous for her prophetic sayings that stressed the unification of opposing forces. Invert nature, she advised, and you will find that which you seek. Another of her sayings was, join the male and the female, and you will find what is sought. She is also famous for the mystical dictum that describes the progression of alchemical transformation. One becomes two, two becomes three, and by means of the third and fourth, it achieves unity. Thus the two are but one. The second famous female alchemist in Alexandria and a contemporary of Maria Prophetessa was Cleopatra, who should not be confused with Cleopatra, the Hellenic queen of Egypt. This Cleopatra is credited with inventing the chief laboratory apparatus of alchemists down through history, the alembic or stillhead. Distillation allowed alchemists to purify substances into their most essential components and is the most important operation in chemistry. Cleopatra's philosophical writings on alchemy stress the importance of bringing inanimate substances and chemicals to life, and she compared the work of alchemy to the creation of a fetus in the womb. Greek philosophy and alchemy. Not only were the Alexandrian alchemists inventing new equipment and improving ancient techniques, but they also fundamentally altered alchemical philosophy. Alexander's primary instructor in alchemy was Aristotle, whose theory of the four elements found full expression among the alchemists of Alexandria. Aristotle's belief that nature strives toward perfection is clearly part of the alchemical idea that all metals grow toward the perfection of gold within the bowels of the earth. Plato's philosophy that matter was fashioned into its forms by qualities imposed on it from an archetypal realm of ideals also fueled the alchemists' belief in the transformation of the metals. The Greeks taught that the microcosm and macrocosm obeyed the same set of universal laws, and that heavenly bodies could influence events on earth. In the Emerald Tablet, the idea of the macrocosm is represented by the word above, and the idea of the microcosm is represented by the word below. The philosophy here is that all is one. That is, the same laws apply to all levels of reality. Definition. Microcosm and macrocosm is a way of expressing the idea that the same patterns of creation and change are present on all levels of the universe, from atoms to the stars. Microcosm is from the Greek words for small, micro, and world, cosmos. Macrocosm is from their word for large, macro, and world, cosmos. Another Greek idea that became part of the philosophy of alchemy was the belief that nature itself is alive and aware and participates in changes in its environment. In other words, there is a divine presence in the world responsible for the changes we experience. Thus, the alchemists considered all matter to be alive, and believed any substance could be transformed and perfected if that indwelling spirit, which was thought of as a tiny spark of light, could be purified and released. In their writings, the alchemists referred to the spark of life concealed in the darkness of matter as the magisterium, the grand elixir, or the philosopher's stone. The concept of transmutation. One of the biggest philosophical changes in alchemy took place during the Greek period in Egypt near the end of the 4th century BCE, and had to do with the idea of the transformation of metals. Today, we refer to the permanent transformation of one metal into another as transmutation. However, it is apparent from surviving manuscripts that the Egyptians judged metals by the physical qualities of color, hardness, texture, and weight, and if a metal looked like gold, they considered it gold. As mentioned earlier, the Egyptians were unsurpassed in the arts of dyeing fabrics, tinting glass and gemstones, and tinging metals. To change the colors and textures of metals, they dipped them into acids and other chemical solutions, alloyed or gilded them with different metals, or treated them with a variety of polishes and secret compounds. In changing the appearance of metals, however, the Egyptians were not consciously faking things. They really believed the metals could actually be changed into one another by manipulating their visible qualities. For instance, in the Leiden Papyrus, an alchemical scroll written in 727 BCE, there are numerous recipes for the coloring and gilding of metals, but the concept of actual transmutation does not arise. The same thing is true in Bolos's On Natural and Mystical Things and other early alchemical manuscripts. By the 4th century BCE in Egypt, however, a distinct change occurred in the way alchemists described the transformation of metals. The practical recipes on tinging and gilding metals were gone. Instead, the coloring and alloying of metals were interpreted in spiritual terms, and the consciousness of the alchemists seemed to be taking part in the chemical operations. In a long commentary to the librarian priest of the Serapeum in Alexandria, the alchemist Synesius described this sudden change in attitude. Although the methods seem obscure and mystical, there is no doubt the new generation of alchemists were convinced their techniques produced genuine and permanent transformation. The concept of transmutation was born. Of course, the change from the practical to the mystical approach to transformation of metals was probably not as sudden as it appears in the manuscripts. In all likelihood, the change in attitude was the result of a mixing of philosophies in Alexandria that took centuries to assimilate. Destruction of the Alexandrian texts. While alchemy flourished around the world at the beginning of the first millennium, the secretive activities of the alchemists and a deteriorating political climate in Egypt spelled disaster for the great library at Alexandria. The first assault came because of a conflict between the Egyptian co-rulers Ptolemy XIII and his sister Cleopatra. The Roman ruler Julius Caesar arrived in 48 BCE to resolve the conflict and named Cleopatra the sole ruler. But her brother blockaded the port of Alexandria and war broke out, resulting in the great library catching fire with an estimated 400,000 manuscripts lost. The 300,000 remaining manuscripts of the great library were then moved to an adjoining temple called the Serapeum and to a center for scholars known as the Museum. What remained of the library survived another 3 centuries. Then, in 270 CE, the Queen of Syria invaded Egypt and occupied Alexandria for 2 years before the Romans drove her out. During the occupation, the museum was partly destroyed and more books were lost. By 275 CE, the mystical and secretive writings of alchemists in Alexandria had caught the attention of Roman authorities. Finally, in 290 CE, Emperor Diocletian decreed the destruction of all manuscripts on alchemy in Egypt, which resulted in a further loss of precious original works on alchemy. Then in 312 CE, Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, and in 391 CE, Emperor Theodosius banned all pagan sects. Christian zealots immediately attacked the Serapion Temple library, destroyed nearly all the books, and turned it into a Christian church. The museum survived until 415 CE, when Christian mobs dragged the last librarian out into the street and accused her of being a heretic and teaching Greek philosophy. Using abalone shells, they scraped the flesh from her body while she was still alive. What remained of the Great Library of Alexandria consisted of fewer than 30,000 volumes, which were moved into a new building for safekeeping. The final straw for the library came when the Arabs conquered Egypt in 642 CE, and Caliph Umar instructed his men to burn all the remaining books. According to historical accounts, he told his generals, "If these writings of the Greeks agree with the Book of Allah, that they are redundant and need not be preserved. If they disagree, they are blasphemous and ought to be destroyed." The growth of alchemy in Asia. Meanwhile, alchemists in China and India, who had been inspired by the writings of the Alexandrians, made great strides in their craft, and from 300 BCE onward, alchemy became very popular throughout Asia. However, both Chinese and Indian alchemy were well developed centuries before the rise of Alexandria. Alchemy had surfaced in China around 500 BCE and had its roots in Taoism, a system of philosophy that originated with a Hermes-like sage known as Lao Tzu. His teachings became the basis for a tradition of inner alchemy that focused on the transformation of the practitioner's life force, known as qi. The basic premise of this kind of biological alchemy is that humans have only a limited supply of the life force in their body. This leaks away through the day-to-day activities of living, but it's possible to accumulate the life force and live for centuries if one understands alchemy. From The Alchemist. Taoist alchemy rests on the same basic principles revealed in the Emerald Tablet, and there are many possible explanations for these similarities. According to legend, Hermes traveled throughout Asia and lived in what is now Ceylon for some time. There are even some references to Hermes' presence in ancient Indian religious texts. In terms of the Emerald Tablet, the life force, or qi, is the one thing. It is transformed by the meditation of one mind. This idea shows up in Taoist alchemy in the principle of qi follows mind. By learning to focus the light of consciousness, the practitioner hopes to transform and control the life force. Lao Tzu alchemy must have worked, for many reports say he lived nearly 200 years. His followers developed a huge body of writings that consisted of over 1,500 manuscripts. Of these, about 500 deal with alchemy. The Taoist alchemical texts discuss recipes for creating various mineral elixirs, provide descriptions of alchemical apparatus, and give rituals and meditations for purification and focusing of the mind of the alchemist. Taoist alchemists also experimented with the life-giving properties of gold, cinnabar, a sulfur mercury ore, jade, pearls, lapis lazuli, rubies, and many other minerals, as well as thousands of herbs. By 300 BCE, Chinese alchemists were attempting to transmute base metals into gold, but not necessarily for material wealth like so many of their counterparts in the West. The Chinese were focused on extending life and saw gold as an essential ingredient in the much-sought golden elixir of immortality. One of the most famous Chinese alchemists was Hauck, who lived from 283 to 343 CE. As a child, he was trained in the strict moral doctrines of Confucianism, but embraced Taoism as a young man. He became an alchemist and spent the rest of his life searching for the elixir of life. His gentle philosophy was a blend of Confucian ethics and Taoist mysticism that he described in a monumental work called He Who Holds to Simplicity. In one of his alchemical treatises, Hauck described the three kinds of alchemy practiced in China. The first, he said, concerned the preparation of a drinkable gold liquid that produced longevity. The second was about producing an artificial cinnabar, or red stone, that could be projected to perfect any substance instantly. The final kind of alchemy concerned the actual transmutation of base metals into physical gold. Like the Chinese, the Indian alchemists were conscious of accumulating the life force, which they symbolize as Kundalini, a serpent of energy coiled at the base of the spine. Also, like the Chinese, Indian alchemists associated medicinal gold solutions with longevity and immortality. Definition. Rasayana is a Sanskrit word that literally means the path, yana, and the elixir, rasa. It is considered the rejuvenation branch of the ancient Indian health tradition of Ayurveda, which is another Sanskrit word meaning knowledge, Veda, of the life force, Ayur. Rasayana alchemists make mercury cures, gem elixirs, herbal tonics, and other alchemical products sold throughout modern India. Sanskrit texts mentioning alchemical methods and the elixir of life date back to 1000 BCE, but very few original alchemy manuscripts from India still exist. We know the alchemical tradition flourished in India from 900 to 1300 CE. However, except for an oral tradition that survives in the Tamil communities in southern India, a popular system of health tonics and elixir therapy called Rasayana is all that remains today. By 1100 CE, both Chinese and Indian alchemists were clearly becoming less concerned with practical operations and more focused on the spiritual techniques of transformation. The metals had become identified with various parts of the human body, and the purified essences the alchemists sought to work with were to be found within. In fact, Taoist adepts began seeing themselves as spiritized essences of the noble metals, whose duty was to work their transmutations in a world of base metals or common mortals. Among Taoist alchemists, there was a tremendous optimism that changing the world was really possible. But even as the spirit of alchemy soared to new heights in the Orient, it was nearly extinguished in the West during the Dark Ages. How the Arabs saved alchemy. Although the Arabs destroyed what remained of the great library of Alexandria, they were ultimately responsible for preserving alchemical knowledge. As the Arabs established a new civilization throughout Persia, Palestine, Syria, Egypt, Arabia, Asia Minor, North Africa, and eventually Gibraltar and Spain, they assimilated a great deal of diverse cultures in a short period of time and were eager to acquire those cultures' knowledge. From its founding around 750 CE, Baghdad became a center of learning, and manuscripts from all around the world made their way to the city. While a handful of the Alexandrian manuscripts made their way to Constantinople, most of the more important works ended up in Arabia. Many Alexandrian alchemical scrolls had already been translated into Arabic, and others were smuggled out of Egypt after Emperor Diocletian's decree of 290 CE. Around 400 CE, a mystical group of Christians known as the Nestorians saved many alchemical manuscripts by taking them to Persia and Arabia for safekeeping. The Sabians of Haran, a Syrian group of astronomers and alchemists, translated many Alexandrian alchemy texts into their native dialect before they were exiled to Mesopotamia in 489 CE. Knowledge of alchemy had spread through Babylon to the Orient around 500 CE, and finally reached Europe with the Moorish invasion of Spain in 711 CE. At its peak, the Muslim occupation of Europe encompassed Spain, Gibraltar, and most of Portugal and southern France. Cordoba in Spain became the new center of alchemical knowledge, and Muslim, Jewish, and Christian alchemists and mystics all flocked to the city. Notable alchemists who came to Cordoba to live and work included Maslama ibn Abd, Muhammad ibn Umal, and Moses bin Maimon, also known as Robert of Chester. Like Alexandria, the crossbreeding of ideas in Cordoba resulted in a flood of new ideas. Jewish texts like the Zohar, Book of Splendor, and the Sefer Yetzirah Book of Formation gave birth to the Kabbalah, and many lost alchemy manuscripts were retrieved after they were translated back into Latin from Arabian. Finally, with the Crusades, the Templars and other travelers who went to fight for the Holy Land further dispersed the Arabian texts on alchemy throughout Europe. Arabian alchemy. The Muslims knew the legends of Thoth, the Hermes of the Greeks, and called him Idris or Hermes. According to Arabian legend, Hermes was exiled from Egypt and came to Babylon to teach. The Babylonian Hermes wrote at least 15 new books on alchemy and magic, including the Great Epistle of the Celestial Spheres. Many works by Greek philosophers were among the Arabian alchemical translations. Plato, or Aflatun, was considered by Arabians to be a great alchemist who invented several devices for use in the laboratory. According to the Arab tradition, Pythagoras acquired his knowledge of mathematics and alchemy from the scrolls found in the Pillars of Hermes, known as Pythagoras in Arabia. Pythagoras' Book of Adjustments became very popular among alchemists. There were also translations of the works of Archelaus, the teacher of Socrates, to whom Arabs attribute the great alchemical treatise Turba Philosophorum. Also, translations exist of the oral teachings of Socrates, who was considered a practicing alchemist who successfully generated an artificial life form. Socrates never publicly admitted to being an alchemist and was opposed to writing down any alchemical treatises for fear they would fall into the wrong hands. Aristotle, who the Arabs called Aristu, was revered as a great alchemist and scholar. Aristotle wrote a book on alchemy for his student Alexander the Great, which by order of Heraclius was translated into Syrian in 618. Several works by Aristotle survived only in Arabic, including a discourse between him and Alexander called Epistle of the Great Treasure of God. The book has 3 chapters entitled About the Great Principles of Alchemy, Alchemic Operations, and the Elixir. In it, Aristotle reviews the alchemical writing of Hermes, Asclepius, Pythagoras, Plato, Democritus, and Ostanes. The other writings of the Alexandrian alchemists also became popular in Arabia, and many translations were made. The works of Bolos of Mende and Zosimus were especially popular. A group of Hermetic Muslims called the Brothers of Purity compiled an encyclopedia of alchemical theory and practice in the years between 909 and 965 that consolidated the diverse teachings. The first Muslim alchemist, Khalid ibn Yazid, was initiated into alchemy by Maurinius, a Christian hermit and alchemist who flourished in the 650s. His student Khalid lived from 660 to 704 and wrote several original treatises on alchemy. Khalid's castle became a vibrant center for alchemy in the 7th century, with visiting alchemists sharing their books and discussing their ideas with each other. Thoth's tips. Did you know that an Arabian alchemist invented the camera? Ibn al-Haytham, also known as al-Hazin, lived from 965 to 1039 and is considered the father of photography for building the first camera, which was basically a sealed dark box with a pinhole lens that projected an image on the back of the box. The Arabs had long before discovered the photosensitive properties of silver compounds, such as silver nitrate and silver chloride, and probably took the first crude photographs. Modern scientists have even speculated that Al-Hazin's camera design could have been used to create the Shroud of Turin. One influential Arabian alchemist was Al-Razi, who is known in the West as Rhazes. A Persian alchemist and physician who taught in Baghdad, he lived from 866 to 925. Rhazes was an even more prolific writer than Jabir and authored 33 books on natural science, mathematics, and astronomy, and 48 more on philosophy, logic, and theology. He authored 21 books on alchemy, including his influential Compendium of 12 Treatises and Secrets of Secrets. Razi was a very accurate and systematic experimenter, who produced the first classification of metals, chemicals, and other substances. Razi was also known as a compassionate teacher and humanitarian, who personally distributed gifts to the poor and nursed the sick back to health with his own preparations. Not all alchemists fared well in Arabian lands. Al-Tugari, a widely respected alchemist born in 1063, worked as a civil servant, but politics proved his undoing. He was publicly executed in 1121. Before he died, Tugari wrote many important books and poems on alchemy. He claimed to have gotten his esoteric knowledge directly from Hermes, and indeed his work is very sophisticated and can only be understood by advanced students. Tugari's most famous work is The Lamps and the Keys, in which he presents ancient Hermetic teachings and theories of alchemy. Thanks to Arabian alchemy, the basic laboratory methods of distillation, sublimation, dissolution, calcination, and crystallization were greatly improved and better understood. The refining of metals and alloys was also perfected. Overall, the greatest contribution was the development of chemical apparatus and experimental techniques. The Arabs were meticulous and untiring in their experimentation and made careful written observation of their results. They designed their experiments to gather information and answer specific questions, which represented the true beginning of the scientific method. The gibberish of Jabir. The greatest Arabian alchemist was Jabir ibn Hayyan, who lived from 721 to 815 and wrote an astonishing number of books that dealt with every aspect of alchemy. Among his most important works are Book of the Kingdom, Little Book of the Balances, Book of Mercury, and Book of Concentration. He also translated dozens of alchemy manuscripts and saved many original texts that had been lost when the Great Library of Alexandria was destroyed. Jabir was a fanatical experimenter, and his practical guides to alchemy included the refining of metals and preparing steel, dyeing of cloths and leather, the making of varnishes to protect cloth and iron, writing with gold ink from pyrites, glassmaking using manganese dioxide, distilling acetic acid from vinegar, and producing lead carbonate, arsenic, and antimony from their sulfides. Jabir corrected experimental errors and references in the works of Pythagoras, Plato, Aristotle, and other Greek philosophers, and developed his own complex numerological system of scientific alchemy. Jabir the Alchemist. However, Jabir was so careful to conceal the true principles of alchemy that his works rarely made sense to outsiders, and the term gibberish originally referred to his writings. Nonetheless, to the initiated, Jabir is still held in the highest esteem. Jabir believed the metals formed from two primeval forces or exhalations deep in the bowels of the earth. The dry exhalation became sulfur, and the wet exhalation was mercury. The various metals then formed by differing purities and concentrations of sulfur and mercury, and gold formed from the purest and most balanced combination of these two elements. To transform base metals into gold, one must purify and balance their sulfur and mercury. He also popularized the idea of a philosopher's stone that would instantly combine the mercury and sulfur of base metals to make gold, and his lifelong quest was to find it. Tread carefully. The works of Jabir became widely known in Europe under his Latin name Geber, and his works were translated into Latin in the 14th century by someone historians now call Pseudo-Geber. Unfortunately, Pseudo-Geber became so enthused about the original Jabir's work that he decided it wouldn't hurt if he published a few of his own books under the illustrious name of Geber. So be forewarned, while Jabir is always Jabir, Geber is not always Jabir. Jabir's mercury-sulfur theory of the metals was the single greatest advance in alchemical philosophy of the Arabian era. Alexandrian alchemists had planted the seed with their observations of the actions of sulfur and mercury in the Kerotakis apparatus. The preparation of the stone of cinnabar, a brilliant red sulfide of mercury, was made by the union of sulfur and mercury in the apparatus. and this process always held a powerful fascination for the Greek alchemists who considered sulfur and mercury tincturing spirits because of their ability to color and alloy the metals. Jabir combined the Karatakis' observations with Aristotle's theory that the elements earth and water give rise to smoky and vaporous exhalations deep in the earth. The earthy smoke consisted of earth burning, changing into fire, and the watery vapor was water evaporating, changing into air. Jabir added to the theory the idea that sulfur and mercury formed as byproducts of these primordial exhalations. The range of metals formed when sulfur and mercury recombined in various degrees of purity and proportion. Jabir theorized that the two tincturing spirits of sulfur and mercury acted like two dyes that could be mixed to produce a range of colors, or in this case, a range of metals. The least you need to know. Alexandria was the center for ancient alchemy and source of alchemical manuscripts and ideas for the whole world from 300 BCE to 400 CE. Many of the world's most important alchemy manuscripts, including the scrolls of Thoth, were lost in the successive burnings of the Great Library of Alexandria. The Arabians copied and translated many Alexandrian texts and introduced them to Europe with their invasion of Spain. The teachings coming out of Alexandria inspired Chinese and Indian alchemists, but they had also developed their own unique traditions earlier. Chapter 4: Medieval Alchemy and the Quest for Gold. In this chapter, Alchemy in the Dark Ages, the genius of Roger Bacon, the Church's persecution of alchemists, alchemist Nicholas Flamel and Sir Isaac Newton, Puffers, a new class of alchemists, and the demise of alchemy and rise of chemistry. After the tumultuous outpouring of alchemical ideas in Alexandria, the craft of alchemy went into a dormant phase and was actively pursued only in Arabia and the East. The West was in the grip of the Dark Ages, a period of stagnant intellectual growth and lack of innovation that lasted from the fall of the Roman Empire in 476 CE to the beginning of the second millennium in 1000 CE. Arabian invaders brought alchemy back to life in Europe through the infusion of Alexandrian manuscripts and commentaries they brought with them when they crossed over from Morocco in 711 CE and occupied Spain for more than 700 years. The Islamic rulers proved very tolerant, and Spain soon became a haven for Jews and other persecuted minorities. The new rulers also encouraged learning in what some historians refer to as mini-Renaissance in Europe. The Emerald Tablet and other alchemy manuscripts, first translated into Latin in the early 1100s, quickly spread throughout Europe. Scholars eagerly embraced the new ideas, which resulted in a wide dissemination of alchemy books. However, alchemy proved to be a complex tradition full of special jargon and symbolic images, and the ancient craft was not so easily deciphered. Try as they might, early students of alchemy failed to grasp the deeper meanings of the new ideas, and preferred literal interpretations that did not require too much thought. In the cryptic, multi-level language of alchemy, interpreting anything literally spelled disaster. So before long, European alchemists were trapped in a quagmire of gibberish and contradictory concepts. Only one literal fact seemed clear, and that was that alchemy was about making gold. Nevertheless, the early alchemists' attempts to transform base metals into gold resulted in the discovery of acids, alcohols, alloys, and hundreds of new compounds. Alchemy became the leading intellectual movement in Europe, even to the point where some universities started replacing the works of Aristotle with texts attributed to Hermes. This was the heyday of alchemy. The beginning of European alchemy. The first translation of an Arabian alchemist manuscript in Europe was the Book of the Composition of Alchemy by Mauritius. He had lived in the 7th century. In 1144, Robert of Chester, who translated the Quran and introduced algebra and other Arabian teachings to the West, translated this book into Latin. Soon after Robert's translations began circulating, the floodgates opened, and by 1200, Europe was inundated with hundreds of Arabian books. So much translating was going on that the Archbishop of Toledo in Spain founded a new college completely devoted to making Latin translation of Arabian works. One of his translators, Gerard of Cremona, single-handedly translated 76 manuscripts, including important alchemy books by Avicenna and Jabir. Many writers were also ready to interpret the confusing alchemy texts for the eager Europeans. Writers such as Vincent of Beauvais and Bartholomew the Englishman added long commentaries to the Latin translations of Arabian alchemy works, and other authors wrote whole books trying to explain what the Arabs were saying. Jewish scholar Moses Maimonides wrote a popular commentary on alchemy entitled Guide for the Perplexed. Before long, Europe was producing its own alchemists. The first of these was a Swabian monk by the name of Albertus Magnus, Albert the Great, who lived from 1193 to 1280. Albertus was a true genius, so skilled in all forms of knowledge that he was called Doctor Universalis. He became an adept in alchemy, and his lab work resulted in the discovery of potassium lye and many other useful compounds. Through his meticulous observations of the metals, Albertus realized the regularity of properties charted in the modern periodic table, in which the characteristics of the elements repeat in an eightfold cycle. The metals are similar in their essence, and differ only in their form, he summarized. One may pass easily from one to another, following a definite cycle. Albertus taught at several universities, including in Freiburg, Cologne, and Paris, and initiated other Europeans into alchemy. One of his students was St. Thomas Aquinas, who was one of the world's greatest philosophers. Aquinas popularized the works of Aristotle and wrote a monumental compendium of religious philosophy called Summa Theologica. He is also thought to have created the influential text Aurora Consurgens, which is an alchemical interpretation of Song of Songs. Aquinas was a prolific writer, but after having a mystical experience in December 1273, he never wrote another word. As a result, several of his most important works end abruptly in the middle of a paragraph. He told his fellow monks that during meditation he had seen a vision of Sophia, the divine feminine principle suggested by the patriarchal church. He said he had found the philosopher's stone in the wisdom of Sophia, and after that profound experience, everything he had written seemed worthless, like so much straw in comparison. The Wizardry of Roger Bacon. Educated at Oxford and Parisian universities, Roger Bacon was another medieval genius who mastered a number of different disciplines. Like Leonardo da Vinci, Bacon created drawings and models of airplanes, helicopters, tanks, submarines, and other inventions centuries ahead of his time. He drew one of the first complete maps of this world and created the more exact Gregorian calendar we still use today. He also built early microscopes and telescopes and constructed a towering observatory that survived for centuries. Bacon was initiated into alchemy by a mysterious Frenchman named Master Peter, whom Bacon often referred to as the Lord of Experimentation. Others suggest that Albertus Magnus may have initiated Bacon in Paris, but whoever taught him, Bacon quickly became Europe's leading alchemist. He shared formula from numerous useful compounds, including gunpowder, and produced powerful tinctures and elixirs. He is also said to have achieved successful transmutations of the metals. From The Alchemist. In Mirror of Alchemy, Roger Bacon described his practical view of alchemy. Alchemy is a science teaching how to transform any kind of metal into another through the use of the proper medicine. Alchemy, therefore, is about how to make and compound a certain medicine, called the elixir, such that when it is cast upon metals or imperfect bodies of any kind, it fully perfects them in the very projection. The first principles of this elixir can be found in nature, and are called sulfur and mercury, and all metals and minerals are begotten of these two. But I must tell you that nature always intends and strives to the perfection of gold, yet there are many accidents coming between the metals that change their purity. Unfortunately, Bacon was so far ahead of his time that his contemporaries believed he was in a league with the devil, and his antisocial behavior did not help dispel the rumors. He was said to have created a talking head of brass that revealed dark secrets to him and a mirror in which he could see into the future. Although he was a Franciscan monk with a doctorate in divinity from Oxford, Bacon was constantly in trouble with the church, which kept a close eye on his activities. In 1257, a church court accused him of practicing sorcery and placed him under house arrest in Oxford for the rest of his life. Pope Clement IV released him from his sentence in 1267 on the condition that Bacon write down all his knowledge in one book. The result was a vast compendium of mathematics, science, and philosophy called the Opus Majus, the major work. In it, Bacon summarized all branches of science and proposed they were all part of a single true philosophy that had been lost to mankind. Bacon continued to criticize the church and even declared that the ancient civilizations of Egypt and Greece were morally superior to the Christian world. Not surprisingly, he was sentenced to prison for heresy in 1278, but was released 14 years later by the head of the Franciscan order after Bacon shared certain alchemical secrets with him. In his typically defiant fashion, Bacon immediately began work on Compendium Theologiae, a book about the theological errors and faults of Catholicism. His superiors were incensed at his impudence, but this time, because he had an ally in the head of the Franciscan order, he avoided prison. The church never forgave Roger Bacon, and his works are still banned. When he died in 1294, his fellow monks nailed all the books in his library to their shelves and left them to rot unopened. Alchemy and the Church. Roger Bacon's run-ins with church authorities were typical of the relationship between alchemists and religious authorities in the Middle Ages and Renaissance. To avoid conflicts, some alchemists deliberately concealed their work in Christian terminology. For instance, the word Christ was often used to refer to the philosopher's stone, the spark of life concealed in the darkness of matter. Other alchemists stopped publishing their ideas or went into hiding. But many alchemists would not compromise their principles. Alchemist and mathematician Giordano Bruno is a good example. He gave public lectures on the principles of the Emerald Tablets and portrayed the universe as a living presence full of alchemical influences. Declaring the tablets' operation of the sun as the grand symbol of all natural processes, he boldly asserted that the sun was the center of the cosmos, in direct violation of church dogma. Then he went so far as to assert that the universe was infinite and contained many other worlds that harbored intelligent life. That declaration was too much for the church, and in 1576 they attempted to arrest him on charges of heresy. Bruno, who was a Dominican priest, got wind of the action against him and fled. But the church pursued him all across Europe as he continued to publish his heretical manuscripts. Finally, the priests of the Inquisition caught up with him in 1592 and began a 7-year trial, during which they listed every single blasphemous statement Bruno ever wrote and demanded he recant each one. When he refused to recant something he had said, they tortured him mercilessly. Still, he refused to take back anything he had said or written. When the inquisitors realized they could not break him, they sentenced him to death, and on February 8, 1600, a gag was tied tightly around Bruno's tongue, and he was burned alive in public. The church was always suspicious of alchemists' preoccupation with meditation and spiritual development. The chillingly unsympathetic position of the church in that regard was read into court records during the heresy trial of Miguel de Molinos in Rome in 1687. Molinos was an advocate of meditation and quiet contemplation, but he crossed the line when he asserted that anyone could practice prayer and meditation in the presence of God in the privacy of his own home. According to the representative of the Pope, the duty of the church was only to preserve ritual and maintain the physical presence of the church, and not to invoke the spiritual enlightenment of individuals. The church banned all of Molino's writings and sentenced him to life in prison, where he died 9 years later. Of course, the church's fury was not directed just against alchemists and people seeking spiritual development. Anyone who healed with herbs or extolled the virtues of natural cures was accused of practicing the black arts. The church had declared that the devil caused all disease, which could only be cured by exorcism performed by priests. Anyone else was interfering with the will of God. It has been estimated that more than 3 million people were burned at the stake during the Middle Ages. Girls could be tortured for witchcraft from the age of 9, and boys from the age of 10. Homosexuals were sometimes thrown into the fires of burning witches. In fact, the derogatory term faggot originally referred to small logs used to start fires. The church also proclaimed that all cats were demons to be burned along with the witches. Cats were imprisoned alive in the walls of buildings to ward off evil spirits. And at Easter, cats were locked in wicker baskets and thrown into bonfires. These church practices killed so many cats that the rat population surged, which contributed to the rapid spread of the Black Death, or the bubonic plague, in the 14th century. Nearly half the population of Europe perished, including at least one pope and hundreds of inquisitors. Medieval and Renaissance alchemy. The Black Death had another unforeseen consequence. It gave rise to the great need for medicines, and alchemists were at the cutting edge in the search for new cures. These alchemists produced many herbal tinctures and tonics that provided relief to diseased people. And the silver and mercury-based antibiotics created by alchemists were the only effective tools for the treatment of syphilis, pneumonia, infections, and the plague. Arnold of Villanova was a Spanish alchemist who became a leader of medical alchemy in the late 13th century. His tonics cured many ailments, and his elixirs were said to rejuvenate body tissue and increase longevity. He treated several national leaders and popes. Although he was briefly imprisoned in Paris for his heretical views on the alchemical nature of the Holy Trinity. Paracelsus, one of the greatest alchemists of all time, is considered the founder of modern medicine because he began using chemicals or drugs in the treatment of disease. His hybrid of alchemy and medicine, which he named iatrochemistry, became very popular in the 16th and 17th centuries. Definition. Iatrochemistry is a branch of alchemy that merged chemistry and medicine. The word comes from the Greek iatros, doctor, and literally means doctor chemistry. Iatrochemists believed that health was dependent on keeping a specific balance of bodily fluids that could be controlled by understanding the effect of chemicals in the body. Nicholas Flamel's powder of projection. Another alchemist who benefited the infirm and diseased people of the Middle Ages was Nicholas Flamel. However, he was no doctor, nor did he produce miraculous cures. Instead, the penniless bookseller suddenly became very rich and gave huge sums of money and property to charities. He also founded several free hospitals, free schools for the blind, and homes for the poor throughout France. His explanation for his newfound wealth was that he had discovered the secret of making gold. Nicholas Flamel was well educated in the Hermetic arts, had been initiated into alchemy, and had a driving passion to discover the philosopher's stone. His bookstore was full of alchemy books, and he was always on the lookout for new alchemy texts to add to his library. One day, a young Jewish man came to him with a rare alchemy book to sell, and Flamel gladly paid him the requested price of 2 florins. This was during a period in history when Jewish people were being expelled from France, and many of them were selling treasured possessions before fleeing to safety in Islamic Spain. From The Alchemist. The house Nicholas Flamel built in 1407 still stands at 51 Rue de Montmorency in Paris. It is the oldest house in the city and was renovated in 2007. The documents of his life still exist in the public records of Paris. His birth and death certificates show he was born in 1330 and died in 1418. His marriage contract to his wife Purnell, his last will and testament, deeds of properties he gave to charity, financial records of his many monetary gifts, and commissions of monuments to his memory are all recorded for anyone to view. The curious book had an ancient binding of worked copper, on which were engraved curious diagrams and certain characters, some of which were Greek and Hebrew and others unknown. The pages of the book were not parchment, but were the bark of young trees covered with script written in an iron point. The pages were divided into groups of 7 and consisted of 3 parts separated by a page showing a strange and unintelligible diagram. The edges of the book were covered in gold leaf, and the title page listed the author as Abraham the Jew, prince, priest, Levite astrologer, and philosopher. There were curses against anyone who read the book who was unworthy of its contents, and every page carried the word Maranatha, which was a Syrian expression used by Jews of the time as a curse on their enemies. It meant literally, "The Lord cometh to execute vengeance on you." Despite his great learning, Flamel could not make sense of the book. He even copied pages from the book, displayed them in his store, and sent them to experts hoping someone might understand parts of them. After 21 years of trying to decipher the book, Flamel decided to travel to Spain to seek the help of the Jewish scholars who had settled there. Flamel left the book in safekeeping with his wife and only took a handful of pages copied from the book. He hoped to entice someone to make the journey back to Paris with him to help him translate the entire book. In Lyon, Flamel met an elderly Jewish scholar who was familiar with the book of Abraham the Jew and wanted very much to see it for himself. But the man died on their return journey. Fortunately, the scholar had recognized the script on the copied pages as ancient Chaldean and translated several pages. That was enough for Flamel and his wife to begin translating the remaining pages, and 3 years later they finished the complete translation. According to his diaries, Flamel followed the instructions of Abraham the Jew and changed a ½ pound of mercury first into silver and then into pure gold. Simultaneously, as Flamel put it, he accomplished the same transmutation in my soul. After only 3 transmutations of mercury into gold, Flamel was rich beyond his dreams, yet he kept none for himself. Instead, he gave it away to charity. At nearly all his charities, Flamel commissioned strange stones or plaques containing alchemical symbols. Alchemists still make the pilgrimage to view mysterious symbols at Saint-Jacques-la-Boucherie Church, the Cemetery of the Innocents, and other works commissioned by Flamel. Flamel continued his lifelong labor of copying manuscripts and studying alchemy, but soon lost interest in making gold. Because he saw his fellow alchemists ruined by the love of gold, he locked away Abraham's book and never shared its contents with anyone. He felt that the physical transmutations in his lab had started a greater spiritual gold growing within him and his wife, Purnell, that was worth more than any material possession. So he continued to live the quiet life of a scholar, wrote many important books on alchemy, and along with his wife lived a long, vigorous life into his 80s. He carefully planned how he wanted his wife and himself buried. He also had his tombstone prepared beforehand. It shows a bright sun above a key and a closed book in the middle of various figures. Many have taken this to mean that Flamel chose not to share the key to alchemy with an impure world. His tombstone can still be seen at his gravesite in Paris at the Musée de Cluny, at the end of the nave of the Saint-Jacques-la-Boucherie Church. After the death of Flamel and his wife, their house, monuments, and even his grave were nearly destroyed by people searching for gold or alchemical secrets. Flamel bequeathed his library to a nephew named Perrier, whom he initiated into alchemy. Perrier kept the family secrets, and Flamel's library was passed down from generation to generation. One of his descendants, named Dubois, demonstrated what he called his illustrious ancestors' powder of projection in the presence of Louis XIII and successfully transmuted leaden balls into gold. The ruthless Cardinal de Richelieu heard of the Flamel demonstrations and imprisoned Dubois for questioning. The cardinal eventually condemned him to death and seized all of his property, including the Book of Abraham the Jew. He also ordered Flamel's original home searched and his coffin pried open. According to reports from the time, no body was found. The cardinal built an alchemical laboratory at the Chateau of Rieux, which he often visited to study the manuscript and try to understand the hieroglyphs to discover the secret of creating gold. Fortunately, the ambitious politician never succeeded in cracking the key of Abraham the Jew. After Cardinal de Richelieu died, the book itself was never found, although copies of the drawings and some of the texts were made. You can view them online at www.flamelcollege.org/flamel.htm. Isaac Newton and the Black Dragon. Famed scientist Sir Isaac Newton was a practicing alchemist who wrote more on alchemy than any other subject. Yet most of his alchemical works were never published, because after his death in 1727, the Royal Society deemed them not fit to print. Today, most scholars agree that Newton considered himself first and foremost an alchemist, and that the inspiration for his laws of light and theory of gravity came from his alchemical work. Newton believed that alchemy originated with Thoth, and that supernatural visitors to ancient Egypt gave it to mankind. He prepared his own personal translation of the Emerald Tablet and kept it safely hidden away in his laboratory. When he worked on his alchemy experiments, Newton demanded complete secrecy. He very rarely went to bed, sometimes not till 5 or 6 in the morning, said one of his servants of alchemy work, especially at springtime, at which time he used to employ about 6 weeks in his laboratory, the fire scarce going out night or day. What his aim might be, I was unable to penetrate into. Newton was always fearful that the secrets of alchemy would leak out into the world and cause fearful political and social consequences, because mankind was not ready for such power. In 1676, after fellow alchemist Robert Boyle announced the discovery of a special mercury that became hot and glowed when mixed with gold, Newton was terrified Boyle had revealed too much. He wrote him a letter cautioning him to keep everything about alchemy secret. Your discovery may possibly be an inlet to something more noble that is not to be communicated without immense damage to the world if there should be any verity in the Hermetic writings. Newton wrote to Boyle, "Therefore I question nothing but that the great wisdom of the noble author will sway him to high silence. There being other things besides the transmutation of metals which none but the Hermetic philosophers understand." Newton was a true adept of alchemy who revered the divine pattern spoken in the Emerald Tablet, while Boyle was one of a new breed of materialistic alchemists who denied the existence of hidden forces, correspondences, synchronicities, and invisible influences of any kind in nature. Newton's lifelong work in alchemy focused on antimony, a brittle steel-gray metal that tarnishes to a black finish, which usually hides its silvery metallic luster. It is known in alchemy as the Black Dragon. Newton was fascinated by the regulus of antimony, which is a star-shaped crystalline form produced when heating antimony ore to high temperatures. If antimony has been sufficiently purified, it forms long and slender crystals, which during cooling form triangular branches around a central point that looks like a bright silver star. Alchemists named this peculiar signature of antimony after Regulus, the brilliant double star at the heart of the constellation Leo. The name is derived from the Latin regulus, meaning lesser king. The regulus of antimony combines readily with gold. From The Alchemist. The word antimony comes from the Greek words antimonos, meaning not alone, because it is an ore often found combined with other metals. But there is an interesting legend that the metal was really named by the 14th century German alchemist Basil Valentine. As the story goes, Valentine secretly added the powdered metal to the food of Dominican monks in order to study its effects on humans. A natural emetic, the antimony made the monks vomit and suffer severe nausea, so Valentine named the metal after the Latin words antimony, meaning anti-monks. The tincture of antimony was used in the Middle Ages to treat venereal disease. Newton believed that the spirit of the black dragon of antimony was purified and released during the creation of its Regulus. He felt the consciousness of the alchemist played an important role in capturing this powerful presence hidden in the black metal. On a clear, uncloudy, and windless day, the Regulus will become starred quite easily when you're ready and sufficiently skilled in the process, he wrote. The clear weather helps considerably, but more so does the bond between the matters and the operator. In the star signature of antimony, Newton found the possibility of gaining cosmic knowledge from the spirits of the metals. He went on to create the Regulus of iron and Regulus of silver, and used them as reflecting mirrors in a telescope to peer deep into space. Finally, Newton applied 3 distilled mercury to the silver Regulus to obtain the most perfect reflecting mirror ever used in telescopes. Perhaps Newton's belief that the Regulus of metals could provide information about the universe was realized. About this time, he began publishing his breakthrough papers on the nature of light and gravity. In the mid-1670s, Newton composed a long treatise entitled The Clovis, the Key, which was the culmination of years of experimentation with the Regulus of antimony. He finally admitted he had transmuted antimony into the long-sought philosophical mercury that would make gold multiply and grow. I know whereof I write, Newton said, for I have in the fire manifold vessels with gold, and this philosophical mercury. I have such a vessel in the fire with gold thus dissolved, but extrinsically and intrinsically into a mercury as living and mobile as any mercury found in the world. For it makes gold begin to swell, to be swollen and to putrefy, and to spring forth into sprouts and branches, changing colors daily, the appearances of which fascinate me every day. I reckon this is a great secret in alchemy. The puffers. The fascination with gold during the Middle Ages produced a new class of alchemists known as puffers. They were called puffers because they constantly sat next to their furnaces, vigorously fanning their bellows, trying to increase the heat of their fires. They were convinced that extremely hot temperatures alone could transmute the metals. Thos tips. The gold-making fever peaked in the 16th century, and large sections of Paris, Cologne, Vienna, Prague, and other European cities were devoted to alchemical workshops in which alchemists pursued their craft with feverish dedication. Some of the original alchemical laboratories can still be seen in the Zlata Ulica, Golden Alley of Prague, where alchemists lived and worked during the reigns of Emperors Maximilian II and Rudolf II. When their methods failed, the puffers resorted to trickery to produce gold. They covered pieces of real gold with dye or paint that could be easily removed by dipping them in magical elixirs that were really just acidic solutions. Using such tricks, many puffers were able to convince princes, kings, and popes to finance their endeavors, although not a few went to the gallows when they were unable to produce more gold than they consumed. A few heads of state, such as Frederick of Wurzburg, had special gilded gallows built just for hanging alchemists. The lure of multiplying gold seduced mercenary alchemists like the puffers, who quickly degenerated into charlatans and criminals, and eventually brought alchemy into disrepute. In fact, so many people claimed to be making gold that several nations feared it would upset their economies if even a few of the stories of transmutation were true. Many passed laws making the alchemical production of gold and silver unlawful. Henry IV of England outlawed alchemy in 1404, but Henry VI started issuing licenses in alchemy in 1440. Later, laws were passed that a certain percentage of all gold coins had to use alchemical gold. All gold coins minted during the reign of Edward III are said to have been made entirely of gold produced by alchemists. Respected alchemists like Isaac Newton, Raymond Lully, and Jacques Lecoeur were appointed the heads of national mints for obvious reasons. During the Renaissance, however, European royalty began to realize they didn't need alchemists to magically multiply their coffers. They could do it themselves simply by printing paper money. The idea surfaced in the early 1700s in the court of the French Prince of Orleans. Like many rulers of the time, he had employed alchemists to produce gold in hopes of paying off his debts, but he promptly dismissed all his alchemists after meeting Scottish gambler and financier John Law, who suggested the prince print worthless paper money to pay off his debts. The promissory notes, each signed by the prince, became legal tender that were traded publicly and never had to be redeemed. The idea caught on as rulers around the world realized that paper could be transmuted into any value much easier than lead into gold. Alchemy became splintered during this period, torn asunder into two opposing camps of the true adepts and the pseudo-alchemists. The pseudo-alchemists were the worldly puffers and other uninitiated amateurs who relied on physical methods and trickery to produce material gold. The true adepts were a select fraternity of initiated alchemists to whom the laboratory work was a part of a comprehensive philosophical and spiritual system based on the teachings of Thoth and Hermes. The experiments of the true adepts to transmute metals were carried out as a demonstration of Hermetic principles, and not just as a way of accumulating wealth. Tread carefully. In studying alchemy, it's extremely important to understand the difference between the two types of alchemists who worked during the Middle Ages. True adepts and pseudo-alchemists both wrote treatises on alchemy that differ greatly in their objectives and dedication to the spirit of alchemy. Very often, modern writers on the subject overlook the distinctions between these two diametrically opposed groups. Thanks in part to the proliferation of pseudo-alchemists in the Middle Ages, the Hermetic principles and spiritual significance of alchemy were shoved into the background. True adepts suffered along with the puffers in the degeneration of their craft and loss of standing in society. By the late 16th century, alchemy was in philosophic disarray and widely regarded as the most confused and difficult system of thought in history. French historian Albert Poisson summed up the situation in his History of Alchemy. Scholasticism with its infinitely subtle argumentation, theology with its ambiguous phraseology, astrology so vast and so complicated, are only child's play in comparison with the difficulties of alchemy. The rise of chemistry. Modern chemistry actually arose from the purely physical work of the puffers and originated from an entirely different tradition than the Hermetic teachings passed down from ancient Egypt. Puffers were called chemists in popular speech in the Middle Ages, and by the Renaissance, chemistry had become a separate discipline from alchemy. Historians sometimes use the term chemistry to refer to the short period in the 17th century when alchemy and chemistry were not sharply separated from each other. But by the 18th century, alchemy and chemistry had gone their separate ways. The trend was obvious as early as 1595, when Andreas Libavius published a book called Alchemia, a guide for chemists that separated the laboratory aspects of alchemy from its spiritual principles. Then Jean-Baptiste van Helmont began working with gases as separate substances and not the single element of air. Johann Glauber continued the trend by treating metals, acids, and salts as everyday things without spiritual or archetypal properties. These chemists shared the alchemists' belief in transmutation, but no longer felt bound by the Hermetic principles of their craft. A new system that focused only on physical reality slowly supplanted traditional alchemy. The demise of alchemy began in 1661 with the publication of Robert Boyle's practical laboratory guide, The Skeptical Chemist. Boyle was both an alchemist and chemist who discovered the mathematical laws that govern the formation of gases. That may not sound earth-shaking to us, but Boyle was actually abandoning alchemy with his idea that mathematical laws and not spiritual principles govern the creation of matter. Antoine Lavoisier, who developed the mathematical theory of conservation of mass and chemical reactions in 1783, is considered the father of modern chemistry. In 1787, he published his definitive works, Elements of Chemistry, and 2 years later, Characteristics of Chemicals. In these books, he abandoned any references to alchemical principles and focused only on the physical properties of substances. The absolute end to any spiritual component in chemistry came with the publication of John Dalton's atomic theory in 1803. His billiard ball theory of matter ignored the elegant crystallization of energy idea that was part of the alchemical viewpoint. This crystalline idea would not return until the rise of quantum physics in the 20th century. In many ways, chemistry can be thought of as a materialistic alchemy. The last gasp of alchemy in Europe came when the Puffer's methods became mainstream in the 18th century with the commercialization of chemistry. Alchemy had degenerated from a practical path of spiritual perfection into a competitive race for commercial products to put up for sale. New drugs and miraculous chemicals have replaced the lure of gold, but the basic techniques and motivation of puffers and chemists were the same. The practice of alchemy could not survive in the new atmosphere of materialism and industrialization, where the work was solely on the physical level. The key to success in the ancient art had always been the ability to work on all levels of reality, not only on the physical, but on the psychological and spiritual levels as well. The alchemist's workshop was between worlds, and things that took place there could never be reproduced in a chemist's lab. The least you need to know. Many alchemists of the Middle Ages had difficulty understanding the alchemy manuscripts being translated for the first time into Latin and focused mainly on making gold. The church persecuted alchemists because of their heretical spiritual beliefs and disregard of church dogma. Those in power employed alchemists to make gold and often executed those who failed. Alchemists split into two fractions during the Middle Ages: true adepts who followed the ancient Hermetic teachings, and the materialistic puffers or pseudo-alchemists. Modern chemistry was born of the practical yet spiritually incomplete laboratory work of the puffers.